Hello, this is Professor James Strickler. This is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 4 about the legislative branch, and it's Lesson 14 concerning gerrymandering. In this lesson, you'll learn about gerrymandering and the ways of gerrymandering called packing and called cracking. The term gerrymandering has its roots in the actions of Elbridge Gerry. Yes, he pronounced his name Gary, but over time it's been evolved in American discourse to be pronounced Gerry. Anyway, Elbridge Gerry, who was governor of Massachusetts, signed a redistricting law in 1812. And remember from the previous lesson what redistricting means. It was the redrawing of election boundaries in the state of Massachusetts. This law drew the districts in some odd shapes. One of those odd shapes, which is depicted in the cartoon on the left, was viewed by some people to look like a monster. Others thought it looked like a salamander. You can imagine instead of a dragon's neck there, maybe a salamander's tail. And as a consequence of some people thinking it looked like a salamander, as they complained about the way that the district boundaries were drawn, a term was coined to call misshapen districts like that gerrymanders. Well, at the time, gerrymanders. As I said in the previous slide, eventually we came to pronounce it as gerrymanders. So this was sort of an insult thrown out at the governor who had signed the law, the bill into law, which created these misshapen districts. But it was an insult that stuck in American history. And so it's come to be a label applied to any districts that are drawn in a misshapen way for political purposes. So gerrymandering means the drawing of election districts to favor one group over another. And gerrymandering is accomplished through one of two methods, which we can call packing or cracking. Now, those names are descriptive of the methods, but they are mostly chosen to rhyme, which will hopefully help you remember them. Let's illustrate what these methods are with a simple diagram. We're going to begin with this red square here. And we want it to represent a typical state. Now, it doesn't represent Wyoming or Colorado or any other rectangular shaped state. Instead, it's just a state. Not a particular state, just a typical state. In this typical state that we're creating, we're going to assume that most of the state is rural countryside. Farms, ranches, things like that. And then within our state, we're going to add this blue circle. And it's going to represent the one big city that exists in the whole state. Well, typically, voters who live in the rural countryside on farms and ranches are more likely to be Republicans, while the voters who live in big cities are more likely to be Democrats. So that then gives us our typical state that we've constructed. We have a bunch of countryside populated with predominantly Republicans, and we have one big city populated primarily with Democrats. Now let's further imagine some things about this typical state that we've created. Let's imagine that it's been assigned 4 seats in the United States House of Representatives, and that Republicans control the state legislature in the state. So they're the ones that will get to draw the boundaries for these 4 seats in the House of Representatives. And they'll be able to do it through gerrymandering in a way that harms the Democrats. From their point of view, that'd be a good thing to do, and helps Republicans like themselves. So let's imagine how they would do that. First of all, let's attack it from the point of view of packing. We're going to examine how the state would gerrymander its boundaries in order to pack certain people in for political advantage. So what the Republican state legislature would do in this case is they would draw a boundary to pack the Democrats in the city all in one place, while dividing the rest of the state into 3 Republican seats. Now notice the way the boundaries are drawn here. We have 4 districts. 3 of them are primarily rural countryside, or maybe even entirely, while the 4th encompasses basically just the big city. So the result of this would be to have 1 seat that is surely going to be Democratic, the one that's filled with the big city, and 3 seats that will surely be Republican. By engaging in packing, then, the state legislature here in this example is able to place their enemy group, the Democrats, in a limited area, so they have no chance of winning anywhere else. Effectively, they handed the Democrats 1 seat and said, okay, you can have that 1 seat, but you'll get nothing else. We will get all the other ones. This is a way to potentially maximize the number of seats that their favored party, the Republicans, would get. Now, please, in this example, I used Republicans to illustrate the point I was trying to make. But Democrats, believe me, do gerrymandering too. They are just as willing to draw the boundaries to favor their political party as the Republicans are willing to draw theirs. So while I've used a Republican example here, that's not to pick on Republicans. Both political parties do it. Now let's go back to our typical state diagram to consider the other possible way that gerrymandering can be done. So the state government, led by Republicans, decides that they want to gerrymander the state again. But this time they're going to do it through the process of cracking. So what do they do to crack the state and draw the boundaries to favor their party while hurting the enemy party, in this case the Democrats? Well, what they're going to do is they're going to divide up, or in other words, split apart the Democrats in the city. So they divide up the Democratic voters. And then they place a few of them in each of the 4 districts, which now they're hoping will each be dominated by Republicans still, even though they each have a chunk of Democrats there now too. So the hope is, from the point of view of the Republican legislature in this example, that there will be no Democratic seats in this represented in the United States House of Representatives from this state. Because their hope is, in each of the districts they've created, that there'll be more Republicans than Democrats, and Republicans will get elected every time, and no Democrats. So while the Democrats are electing no one, all 4 seats from this state would then be filled by Republicans. So when a state legislature, as in this example, decides to use cracking as its gerrymandering method, it will then split the enemy up, the Democrats in this case, and put them in separate areas where they'll never have a majority in any of them. Well, as politicians do gerrymandering, either through packing or cracking, they may end up creating some very bizarrely shaped districts, as you can see in the background of this slide. And I'm going to more clearly show you some examples now. On this slide, we have a district in North Carolina that essentially strings inner city neighborhoods together between various towns in the state. Here's another one, drawn in the state of Maryland. Look how thin some of the parts of the district are and how spread apart the clumps are. How it winds back and forth around the state. Here's another example in the state of Florida. And another in the state of Pennsylvania. And finally, one from the state of Texas. You can see how bizarrely they draw these boundaries, either through packing or cracking. In some cases, the boundaries drawn by the state legislatures, as you can see on this more detailed map, will be as thin as a single lane on a road in order to connect all the pieces together as they run from one neighborhood to another, perhaps packing people of the same political party in together. So now let's review what you learned in this lesson. What is gerrymandering? Is it boundaries to help one party or the other? Is it money laundering? Is it illegal voting? Or is it excessive campaign donations? Gerrymandering is boundaries drawn to help one political party or one group instead of another. What is packing? Is it packing amending a bill? Is packing donations at a single event? Is packing politicians moving to a new area? Or is packing the concentrating of a political party in one area? Packing is the concentrating of a political party in one area so that they win the election in that area, but not elsewhere. What is cracking? Is cracking failing to pass a law? Is it reapportioning a state? Is it redistricting a state? Or is it dividing up a party's supporters? Now, while cracking certainly is a method of redistricting, that's not the best answer because it's a particular kind of redistricting that divides up a party's supporters and puts them into various districts where they can't get enough of them together to win an election. So dividing up a party's supporters is the correct answer. That completes this lesson. The next lesson from Unit 4 will be Lesson 15 about racial gerrymandering, which will be the last lesson from Unit 4.